Good morning, everybody. This is day 3 of the Atelier for Solidarity, organized by the Festival Academy, which is an initiative of the European Festivals Association. A very early morning to the Americas, just a good morning to Europe, MENA and Africa, and good afternoon to Asia and Oceania. We organized the Atelier for Solidarity in response to COVID-19, together with a group of around 60 people from more than 40 countries to reimagine our world together. Today we have a keynote of Arundhati Ghosh, the director of the India Foundation for the Arts. We are delighted to have you with us. She has the very catchy title of Masks on, Blindfolds off, arts and culture in the world of COVID-19. So delighted to have you here. I give the floor to Mike van Graan, South African playwright who will facilitate this session.
Thank you. Okay, well, welcome again, Arundhati. Great to have you here. So the session will run very much in the same way as previous ones have, which is that you'll make a presentation to us and I'll ask a few questions maybe to get things going, and then after that the participants will be able to ask questions and to pose some comments as well. So we're looking forward to having you here with us, and it's always great to have this collection of people, and our carbon footprint is completely nil just about, and we have, you know, across the globe about 40 countries represented in the Atelier. So really cool to have you here from India speaking to us in this keynote as well. Thanks, Arundhati.
Yeah, so thank you so much. Thank you for having me on this program. And I'm delighted actually to share some of what has been happening in India in the arts and culture sector. But before I begin, just a minute about where my position is. So I run a foundation called India Foundation for the Arts. It's a private philanthropic foundation. So we don't take money from the government. We raise our own funds from different sources, individuals, other foundations and trusts, both Indian and foreign corporates, other organizations. So we raise that pot of money and then we make grants. So we're essentially a grant maker. We have various programs, and just to give you a sense, over the last 25 years that we've been around, we've supported about 600 plus projects across the country in multiple disciplines, genres, languages, regions. So multiplicity of voices, and listening to the voices that otherwise get drained with the dominant narrative noise that we hear is one of our key aims. So the journeys of marginalized voices are the ones that we land up supporting. So often the work is also quite political in nature, and that's one of the reasons why we also have to be very careful about where we raise our funds from. So having said that, and being in this foundation for the past 19 years, I've had an amazing opportunity. I've been very privileged to have this vantage point to be able to see what happens in arts and culture in the country. And because the organization is networked to hundreds of grassroots level organizations, individual artists across forms and language that work across the country, it enables us to sometimes be able to summarize their thoughts, what they're going through, their struggles and their challenges. So what I will share with you is not just my work, but to remember that it is the work of a very large collective. And it is that collective voice that I hope I'm able to present to you. The reason, so I'll just be sharing the screen of my presentation now. Can you see it? Can you see it? Okay, great.
Yes. Not yet, but there we go. We can see it now. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Just a sec. I'll make it full screen. Yeah. So, the reason I had named this presentation Masks On, Blindfolds Off, because I think everybody knows that India is a country of great inequalities. But often, and sometimes just because we need to survive through it all, we keep our blindfolds on. What COVID-19 did was, in one whisk, it sort of took those blindfolds off, and the truth, how broken our systems are, how our inequalities are totally out there, it sort of came to us as a shock for many, many people, because it was visually out there for us to see. And before I get to the arts and culture, I think it's important for us to get a little bit of context to that. So I'll share some figures with you so that this gives you a sense of where we stand today. Our first COVID death happened on 17th March. From 25th March, we went into a lockdown with a 4-hour notice. And currently we are in phase 5 of the lockdown till 30th June. So it's also different from different states, and because the patients, the people who have confirmed infected their numbers vary widely across states. So states are taking decisions on how much they're going to open up this lockdown and what's going to happen. But these are the figures as you see. The very worrying thing is, as of 15th June, our new cases, the number of our new cases are rising. Unlike a lot of the other countries where this has gone down post the lockdown, we don't seem to have reached anywhere with that. It's also important for those who do not know the conditions in India to say, we are a very hugely populated country. We live very densely close together. And often 12 people of a family living in one room is quite common. So one has to keep in mind that in a time of social physical distancing and contactless life, it's very difficult to live in a densely populated country like India, given that most of us do not have that privilege to be alone. To just keep that in mind. What happened with this 4 hours notice lockdown on 25th March is suddenly we saw on our streets migrant labor. These are people who come from villages to work in cities. There was no transport. Everything stopped in 4 hours. Their landlords told them to leave their houses and they had to leave overnight. Their wages stopped, and we saw hundreds and thousands of them walking, the way you see in these images, to get back to their homes, which were thousands of kilometers away. And this is what we were all suddenly seeing. Now, this labor was always there in our cities and towns. We were just invisible to them. We didn't see them because they would live in shanty towns near construction places. They actually make and serve our cities, but we never really noticed them. This is what was happening right after the lockdown. Huge, huge crowds. No food, no medicine, no treatment, no transport. This large number of people were just left out there by our government to fend for themselves. Citizens groups did jump in, and I'll come to that, but there was nothing from the government that was supporting or helping them. We also realized how broken our public healthcare system was. Private healthcare is very expensive in India. There was shortage of PPEs everywhere for health workers. And many health workers also therefore got infected and died. And here are some of the images that you can see. The other thing was with our law and order. We had our police beat up people at one end, and on the other end, try and educate people of COVID-19. The reason I'm sharing these images is just so you get a sense of where I will be speaking from for the rest of the conversation, which will be about arts and culture. So this is the climate within which COVID-19's impact was felt in India. I'm sharing some of the figures. We've suddenly, in a month's time, our unemployment went up from 6.7% to 26%. Millions of people lost their jobs, their salaries. 45%, almost 50% of the households reported an income drop. And every single day of the lockdown, the country lost $4.5 billion worth in the lockdown. And there's been a lack of food, medicines, masks, everything that you can think of. And as if this wasn't enough, and nature really loves us, we had two huge cyclones hit. One, the Amphan, hit the east of the country together with Bangladesh and a couple of other countries, but the east of India. And Nisarga hit the west of the country. And then we had locusts. These are these terrible little insects which raid crops. We had a locust raid across our western belt of the country. The worst hit, of course, as always, in any natural disaster, war, anything that you can think of, are the people who are already the most vulnerable in the society. So migrant workers, sex workers, senior citizens, orphans, homeless people, the poor in both rural and urban India, and the people in arts and culture sector this time, because anyway, the economies that run the arts and culture sector in India is very fragile with very little support from the government. It's a very enterprising, self-driven kind of sector, and with no assembly, no physical contact, and basically the fear of what's going to happen now with the large arts and culture sector. There was absolutely no way for them to respond to this. So far, and it's been what, like we are in the third month of the lockdown, there has been no announcement of government schemes or support for the arts and culture. Every week I go and check all their websites. They have various institutions. The Ministry of Culture is one, but there are also other institutions for theatre, for music, for literature. We have been following to see if there has been any announcement, any schemes out there. And till last week, there has been none. It also, it's like rubbing salt on a wound when we hear how countries like Germany, countries like New Zealand, one of the first things that they announced is support for the arts and culture sector. It also makes you feel that while India, every time it needs to speak about soft power, it needs to develop friendship with other countries, it puts out its arts and culture, right? We always say we are the most ancient country in the world. We have such amazing arts and culture here, both traditional and contemporary. We do our festivals of India to build relationships and friendships. But the moment there is a crisis, we completely forget this sector. We spare nothing for this sector. We don't even make an announcement publicly about what the sector is going through and what it needs. So it is then left to individuals and private organizations to pick this up and see what we can do. One of the things that India Foundation for the Arts did is we realized that there was so much anxiety and concerns in the sector. We organized 2 listening sessions, like we just put it up online saying on this day from this time to this time, if you would like to talk about your concerns, if you would like to suggest what the India Foundation for the Arts could do to help, please come on board and tell us. And we invited some artists and the others were like free to come and join. We had 53 artists from across the country come and share their thoughts. And this has enabled us to actually understand and summarize what some of these concerns are for the arts and culture sector. Later, we also shared it with the UNESCO office here so that they are able to put that into their advocacy and build something from there. And I think it'll be good for us to just quickly look at what some of these concerns are, because I feel many of these will be similar to some of the countries that you come from, that you are facing as artists, as festival managers, in your context as well. So first, of course, was the immediacy of the financial crisis, threat of losing income, employment, livelihood, both in the short term and long term, both for rural artists and urban artists. And people who have specific compromised immunity and disability felt that they were being further marginalized during this time. While finance was a big thing, the work itself, how is arts practice going to respond to this itself also was a big concern. Is theatre going to change? Like theatre, which has always been about the collective, which has always been about making it collectively and viewing it collectively. Is that going to like totally become one-on-one like film has with your individual devices, etc.? Is the liveness of it going to disappear? All kinds of performance artists in music, in dance, in theater were worrying about this. And how is that going to affect the kind of relationship that they've had all these years with audiences? How will it impact the aesthetics of these forms and practices? Also, there was a worry of this over digitalization of arts, because what happened is the moment this lockdown happened, and as a theater director told me, an actor is only an actor when she acts. So the moment the actor couldn't act, the actor took on to the video and came online and did something almost like dealing with an existential crisis. What that did is that sort of scared a lot of artists, saying, is this what we're going to do? Is there going to be no thought around how this new medium works? But out of fear, you're sort of pushed on to this medium just to like use it like before, without thinking through how this medium, this online space, is affecting your arts practice. Now, about the online space itself, there were many concerns. One was, of course, the fact that in a country like India, if you're saying online, if you're talking technology and gadgets and stuff, how many of us actually have the kind of gadgets and tools and technology that you need to be able to properly go online with your arts practice? This was true of many of the teachers of arts. Many artists here actually make their money or their livelihood through teaching. So whether it's dance, music, or theater, they teach. And then because their actual practice earns them very little. And they were worried whether all their students would have the requisite technological gadgets to actually be able to access, even if they manage to come online and teach. They also felt that some of the existing digital platforms didn't quite cater to all the needs of all art forms. So in some cases of music, maybe it was easier to deal with it, but how would then theater look at it? Or how would dance look at it? So these were also concerns that came up. Apart from that, the fourth set of concerns was really about the larger infrastructure within which finds itself in India. There is anyway very little support that comes to the arts. Shifts in individual and collective priorities during this time it was felt that would make the arts even more insignificant. Can you hear me? Yeah. Mike, if you give me a thumbs up, yeah, thanks. Yeah, because here it was saying my connection is unstable. So yeah. It was felt that, schools, colleges which anyway look at the arts as something that is not, not something very important, not priority, will deprioritize it even further. And since there has been no support from the government announced, it's quite clear how much priority the government gives to the arts. So the community is feeling isolated. The community is feeling uncertain about tomorrow. And basically, there are also mental health issues that are cropping up, and the results are very sad and tragic. We've had some really tragic news in the last couple of days of artists leaving us. So this has been the concerns. Now, I don't want to get into the details of this slide. These are suggestions that the community made, which would help them. But and anyway, you will get this presentation later, so you can go through it. But these are very specific to India. There were suggestions about funding, how funding organizations like ours could shift our strategies and support with lesser money, more artists, if that was possible. There was a sense of whether we could share further, go deeper, and support those who otherwise fall outside of this digital online sort of community. So reframe some of our programs. There were also suggestions about how organizations like ours could make space for online resources to be shared. Some of our archival material, or building master classes for artists, Or even something as simple, and this afternoon in India, we are doing something. We are doing a beginner's module on how to use online digital media for artists. Because a lot of the older artists who came and spoke to us in this listening post said, we've never dealt with technology. We don't know how this works. We need to learn from young people. And that enabled us to actually build a beginner's and an advanced model. And the first of which is going to happen today. And there have been registrations and people will come and learn how to use it, how to monetize it. About the online platform, the monetization question came up, and I think there's a lot more thought we need to give to that, because if some of this is going to become more part of our normal existence, then we have to think about how artists are going to survive and make a livelihood. There were other suggestions they gave us also, which pointed to how broken, how fragmented the system around the arts and culture, the ecology already is. And some of those inequalities were like sort of, again, the blindfolds were off. They were just coming up more aggressively at us, and we have to deal with those. What has been very inspiring in all of this has been how artists and citizens have just dived into relief work, rescue work, mobilizing resources work in the country, as individuals or as groups of people, as collectives. So I've just mentioned some of them. The Assistance for Disaster Affected Artists, ADA. Now, ADA also means in Urdu style or an enactment, an action. You do an ADA like that. So this was a fund set up by a few of us, artists and arts managers, to support folk artists. There was the Sumanasa Foundation project. I've got this little poster of theirs that raised money. There was also Artists for Artists in Mumbai, supporting artists with basic groceries. And of course, these are only some of the things that I could find and I was a part of. But there have been many such little initiatives around the country that the civil society, citizens, artists have taken up and done. What was also quite amazing and inspiring for me to see is that so many artists, especially in the theater that I know of, just dived into relief work, whether it was for COVID or later for the cyclones. And you see them all over, supporting artists, doing online concerts, supporting citizens, doing online concerts to raise funds, and actually being there, risking their health and safety to distribute ration to those who needed it the most. So, in some way, in spite of all the darkness around, this has been a super, super inspiring thing for many of us to be part of it, but also to witness it at a time like this. This I want to talk about because this is something that we did as part of ADA. And I must mention Shiva Mudgal, Anish Pradhan, Rahul Vora, Mona Irani, Samira Iyengar, and me started this Assistance for Disaster Affected Artists. And what we said is, okay, so the government is not saying anything. Maybe the government doesn't know what kind of emergency fund or strategies are required. So what we did is we looked through what several countries were doing. We looked through what Germany was doing, what New Zealand was doing, what the UK was doing. And we created a framework. We created 3 schemes. And we wrote to the 29 federal states of India, to their chief ministers, saying, you should support arts and culture. And if right now you don't have anybody to tell you, here are 3 schemes. So far, and this was sent about 2 months ago, we have received three responses from 3 governments acknowledging it out of 29. So that clearly tells you how much attention the arts and culture sector is getting in India. But we really feel that even if there is a private entity, a foundation, that can pick up some of these schemes and put it in place, it would be quite amazing. And I hope that happens at least, even if the government doesn't take notice of this. So what are the questions in front of us? I think the deeper questions have been about what is the role of an artist? What should the arts do? Who is it for? And I have 3 images here because the responses to this has come to me in very, very different ways, So there's a film director who used to be a doctor, but then moved on to become a film director. And after 14 years has decided that he now must go back to being a doctor. So I felt maybe at times the best thing an artist does in times like this is not to be an artist and be something else that supports the community, supports society. So that's one way. On the other hand, I have Asta Bebu here. He's a 72-year-old contemporary dancer, one of the most fabulous artists we have in the country. He has taken to digital at 72. He is re-looking at his practice. He's re-looking at what he can do with the medium, and he's creating some amazing new work. So that's another thing that an artist could do. There are also artists coming together to raise relief material through their art. So visual artists in the middle visual, the visual artists have got together and are selling and auctioning their paintings to raise funds for the arts. So I guess each artist is asking this question: what is their role in society, and what should the arts do? Who should the arts be for? I have had 9 realizations during this time, and sharing with my friends in the arts and culture sector, many of them agree to some of this. The first, of course, is the huge inequalities in the country are lying bare for us to see. At least now, I will not hear somebody say, oh, I didn't know there were poor people in India. Trust me, there are people in India who would say that. Second, that the systems are broken. They are in tatters. So we must have some way of rebuilding either these systems or create new ones. The faith in the government is at an all-time low. Even for the most devoted right-wingers, there's hardly anything they can say now about what this government is doing right, because it isn't. Big business does not care. There has been, in spite of so much support that's come from citizens, civil society groups, artists, and everyday folk, there has been hardly any mention of support that's come from big business, except a few, of course, who are always there. But you know who they are, so you know them. Environmental threats are at an all-time high. With all this COVID, despondency happening around the country, almost every week we hear of some forest area or some river or some hill that is being pawned off to for privatization or to some corporate or the other. So our environmental threats have just grown. What's been inspiring is that citizens have great empathy for each other, and citizens can be a great source of power, a very deep source of power. And I think that's come together for us. We need solidarities across intersectoral people's movement. This is something many of us have been talking for a while, but somehow I think a crisis like this pushes you to make it happen, and that's starting to happen. In India, I'm guessing like the rest of the world, we need a new politics and new ways of doing it. And that's keeping some of us awake at night, because we feel that arts and artists need to be a very strong part of imagining that political future. And arts and artists cannot anymore say that this is apolitical. We don't need to get involved in politics. We can just do our art. It's not possible anymore. What you see around you, even to be relevant to your audience, even to be relevant to your times, you will have to think about what the lives that your audience is leading, the struggles and challenges that they have. And to be able to do that, you cannot have your art separate from your politics. So that's the 9 realization. I wanted to end with a sort of a manifesto of hope, because there has been a lot of hopeful things with this time as well. And a few days ago, I spotted this. This is an online performing arts festival that's been organized by the Sumanasa Foundation based out of Chennai. It's led by one of our fantastic Carnatic musicians, T.M. Krishna, and his team. And they have been doing a lot of relief work for COVID, for artists, raising money, etc. But what's amazing about this festival is that it has looked at the voices that never get heard. It has looked at those art forms and arts practices that generally fall outside the digital economy. It has kept social justice in mind. It's inclusive of all kinds of castes, gender, which is a huge issue in India. And it has amazing community participation. Many of these forms are community forms. As you will see, next to them, an artist name and group. And those are essentially community forms. And I was thinking, festivals like this is our manifesto of hope, which has diversity of forms and practices, looks at those voices outside of our digital economies and known circuits, looks at social justice, inclusiveness, and community participation, and maybe at some point community curation as well, to make it happen. Once I was teaching not teaching, really sharing some of our work in arts and culture in a management school. And I had a lovely question from one of the students, because we were talking about inclusiveness, we were talking about social justice in the arts. And she asked me, I know who's in the room. How do I know who is not in the room? This is a question that has been with me since then, over the last many, many years. And I think our journey in the arts is also to constantly look at and search for who is not in the room yet, and either bring them in or walk out of the room and meet them. So with that, I would like to end this talk, and maybe all come out of this more compassionate and hopeful for a just and equitable future. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Arundhati. That was really comprehensive and very kind of inspirational, and coming out of your very local conditions. I think certainly for many of us within global South countries, what you're articulating there really does resonate. And it would be interesting to hear from colleagues elsewhere, kind of just what they respond to as well. But thank you very much for that. That was great. So colleagues, this is the time for you to ask questions, to make any comments about what Arundhati has said. And again, in the chat group, let me know if you do have a question or comment. But I suppose maybe just to kick things off, Arundhati, this is an Atelier for Solidarity. And you were talking earlier on about, looking at what New Zealand was doing, what Germany was doing and the like. And I suppose the question is, what has also happened over the last while, because of the nature of the spread of this virus, countries have become more nationalistic in some ways. They've closed their borders. It's almost, what we were talking about, the paradox on the first day of, in order for us as humankind to address this thing collectively, we need to come together. And yet the way for us to stay safe is to stay apart, which is paradoxical and ironical. But what does solidarity for you mean at this time? How should countries like India be in solidarity with others? We've seen examples with the coronavirus itself, where doctors from Cuba, for example, have gone along to Italy and helped with the crisis there, and they're here in South Africa too. And what does solidarity mean for the arts at this particular time, do you think? We're an international group at the moment. What would you advise?
So Mike, I would not totally agree with you when you said that earlier we didn't have borders and the borders have come up only now. Because I feel for many in the arts sector, the borders were always there. Unfortunately, our cultural departments don't speak to our homeland security departments. And the best of artists with a different name or a different clothing or a different religion has been denied visas and not entry into certain bordered countries, right? What I feel this COVID-19 has done is it's in a very, maybe perverse way, equaled everybody, So I don't get a visa as much as my Muslim friend doesn't get a visa. So in some way, it's equated everyone, brought it down to the same level. saying this is what nature does to you. Nature doesn't know that it should give visa to one person and not to another. Having said that, as solidarities, what's also happening is because now we can get online and we don't need our government's permission to speak to each other online. We would have needed that if we had to meet in a place, but online we don't. Therefore, it has actually made contact even more possible. When I look at a room in any of the webinars that I'm getting into now, and I look at everybody, I wonder whether if it was a real physical meeting, whether all of those people with those backgrounds and those difficulty and difficult circumstances could have actually been there in the same room. That has been possible because now we are all online. We don't need the finances and resources to be there, to be spent for us to bring us together. And two, we don't need our governments to tell us who we should talk to and who we shouldn't talk to. So this has actually, I think, in some ways expanded our ways of being. I feel that in many ways, solidarity in the arts should come from us talking about our very specific and common challenges across. And because if we can find a common cause and common purpose, that's going to sort of be our connection points. And at least within the country, what I am seeing is a lot of people who didn't speak to each other before are beginning to speak to each other now. And it's because suddenly in the face of this huge crisis, the internal political differences are seeming very small, and it's seeming like conversation is possible. I think that is something we could really nurture within the country as well as across. And I think we should really, at least through our online forums, like I was thinking this is the best time to do a India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka arts festival. Who's going to tell us not to do it, right? We need minimum resources. And India, Pakistan has never done an arts festival together in a long time. And maybe bring in China as well, because these days we are not being very friendly to China and China is not being very friendly to us. So just make artists do the impossible that diplomacy and governments cannot do. And I think that's going to set amazing examples of solidarity.
And yeah, maybe, Shane, we should bring in some Americans as well at this time. Just kidding. No, I'm just saying it.
You were provoking me, Mike.
No, I'm just saying it. We had a great talk by Hank Willis Thomas yesterday, so I'm just kind of picking up on that in some ways. Well, thank you very much for that. I think you're right that this does, in a way, I think what came out clearly through your talk, that on the one hand, there is incredible devastation as a consequence of the virus. On the other hand, there's incredible opportunity. And I think that that's the challenge to us as creatives. It's to be innovative and think creatively and out of the box at this time. And how can we use this particular moment for a future when things may be whatever normal looks like then? Yep.
Just to add to that, what you said, that I think we should get so used to talking to each other that when that new normal happens, we get addicted to talking to each other. And we'll push our governments to even then enable us to talk to each other. I think that habit, that addiction is important. We should not be able to do without each other, It should be a moment like that where I say that, no, in this conference, Mike just has to be there. You ensure he gets a visa, something like that. Something, this conversation can become such a solid, such a solid connection that even when things, I won't say go back to, but find its new normal, because we don't want to go back to the broken world. We hope it will be a better world that we go into. That some of these connections can actually move on from the online space into the physical space as well.
Yeah, bearing in mind, as you said, that, technology is also a form that divides us, that it is a way in which some people have been excluded. And yet one of the examples you gave was this festival that has discovered or given a voice to those things that are normally on the margin. So it's about political will and vision, I suppose. I mean, in the old normal, we just went along with what existed. Now we've had opportunities to find that which is outside of, you know, what has been the old normal and given space to that. So I just wanted, I mean, you've done incredibly well in terms of laying out how people have seen this particular moment and what the challenges are and what they can possibly do within it. If one looks at, you know, the whole lockdown crisis and what its impact and how it's impacted the arts, I suppose there are three phases that we're looking at. There's this particular phase of lockdown. There's the phase of things becoming unlocked down. So, you know, as steps are taken to ease society back to normality, and yet there are still challenges because social distancing will still be a thing. People will still have to wear masks. There'll still have to be limits on the number of people that are gathered at theaters and festivals and the like. And then there will be kind of a new normal, again, whatever that looks like, probably only once a vaccine is found and people feel safe to go again, to go out again. Have you kind of done any work in that regard, anticipating what the future might be? And, you know, you spoke about all these folk now being unemployed. So that means a huge number of people, even middle-class people, being without jobs, no longer having the resources to go to the theatre to support the arts, as might have been the case in the past. How does one now anticipate that, particularly in a country like India, where there is such limited government support for the arts, so that in a way you were dependent upon a box office that is now itself kind of depleted of resources? What are you anticipating that next phase to look like?
Honestly, we haven't started thinking about what next yet, but we have been thinking through it right now. So what I will share now is just work in progress sort of thinking. One of the problems of this, I don't know, many of you would probably know that in India, we have the curse of untouchability, the caste system. And what this physical distancing has done has brought back this irrational, sort of prejudiced, caste-based untouchability back into the system, almost with a scientific rationale and logic. So one of the first things I think that the arts have to do is to break this myth, this horrible, what some call tradition of untouchability, of treating people who are lower caste, so to say, as less than us. And therefore, you know, carriers of disease and carriers of this, that, and the other. It's terrible. I think it's a crime of the worst kind of thing. But what COVID has done is, in some ways, the politics of purity is back. And I remember a time when HIV came to India, you know, and people started talking about it, and there were all these notions about how, and these stories and these myths around how the infected person could, you know, infect you in different ways. Like, it was almost as if you stood with the person in the same room, you would get infected. And there was all sorts of rubbish going around. Nonprofits for the longest time had to really fight against these prejudices. And I think a large part of that was also done by the arts, by literature, by films. And I think here too, that's one thing we have to do, because otherwise this untouchability is here to stay. In a country like India, which is so susceptible to the politics of purity, this is going to become part of that new normal, which is something we must fight very badly. It was funny. And, you know, I've shared a recent story that I've written with you, and you probably will read it at some point, that this is a rich person's disease, as some people in India would say. This disease has come from people who flew in planes and went to foreign lands. And it is not a poor person's disease. Tuberculosis, malaria, those are poor people's diseases in India. So people who are our domestic help, who help us at home, are saying, we will not go to your houses because you will give us that disease. And it's a fantastic thing for them to say, and saying, sorry, till you guys have recovered, we are not coming and working for you, So suddenly that politics, that dynamics has changed in some way. In the arts, all of this must come into play in our content, in the way we practice the arts. Some are talking about, how even if theaters open up and we have, physical distancing, etc., the sheer fear of being out in a place of assembly is going to be problematic. On the other hand, and I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, when I go to office 3 days a week now, on the roads of Bangalore, which is a southern city where I live and work in India, I see half the people not wearing masks. I see people next to each other. There's no physical distancing in our public space. It is hard to do physical distancing in our kind of public spaces. So it's very hard to think of how this is going to emerge. But a lot of, for example, theater artists are talking about, and this is an idea that a theater artist from Bombay, Sunil Shanbag, shared with me, that they and their group, they are looking at, maybe when this opens up a little bit, using open public spaces where there is enough space. So rethinking theater in open sites, public spaces, which could be in some ways also reclaimed by artists, which has gone away from the hands of artists. Instead of looking at, because people are going to feel scared to enter rooms, to enter closed door kind of spaces for some time. So that's one way. In IFA, what we're trying to do, because we're a grant-making organization and we have that privilege, we are trying to encourage artists to think about this. Exactly what you said, Mike. How is this future going to look like? So apply to us to think through this. Apply to us to experiment with ideas. Apply to us through our arts practice program to rethink how you might look at your dance or music or theater or film in the future, and for the immediate future to come. So, we are enablers, we are facilitators, catalysts, perhaps provocators as well. And we really want to create these opportunities for artists to think through this time.
Yeah, your point about the untouchability is an interesting one, isn't it? Because you've had a situation where, for example, Trump closed off travel from China, as he calls it, in his kind of disparaging way, with the threat coming from China. Then in China, there was a lot of Afrophobia kind of expressed from Chinese folk towards Africans, kind of almost blaming them for bringing the virus there, which is, just ahistorical. And as you say, it's really been people from the wealthier countries who have been traveling and bringing, spreading the virus that way. And yet, because of our history of colonialism and the like, and the cultural hegemony of particular countries, the people who have been basically responsible for spreading the virus haven't been treated in those kinds of ways. It's one of those ironies of history in a way. But thank you very much for answering the question. There is a question to you from Samira. I'd like to invite Samira to basically ask the question.
This is a question from Facebook, I think. So IFA conducted a listening post. Can you talk a little about what such listening could perhaps do in the global scenario, possibilities in digital space? So Samira is somebody I work with quite closely in India. And she's an arts manager. She is also a theater person. And so, I think listening itself and an act in itself is important, because to begin with, it just makes you feel less lonely. I think that's very important, because in the arts in each of our countries, the isolation has been huge for us in different ways. And I think what we find when we talk across borders specifically is realize, in spite of the differences of privilege that some countries have over others or some artists have over others, often the challenges remain the same. So India may be a country where there is less government support, and Germany may be a country where there's a lot of public support for the arts, but the question of building new audiences remain the same in both countries. And how we are going to reach those new audiences in the new normal that we find will remain the same in both countries. So I think it might be interesting to look at, this is a more general, conversation, but look at more specific conversations between theater people. more specific conversations within disciplines or within genres, within artists who use similar languages in their work, to make those contacts and see how we can learn from each other. Again, because we have the time and the ability, that's something we should do. Now, here is what I feel where we should bring in those who are outside of the online digital space. So if we can take a little more effort to support somebody who doesn't have this computer and the internet connection that I have, to be part of this conversation, it would be great. Yeah, we have to think through how to do that, how to reach. But it is important that we do, because if we don't do it now, it's not going to happen in the new normal either. And that's why I really love the arts festival that Sumanasa Foundation is putting together, because they have really worked out how to do it. Not all those artists would have technology. They've provided it to them. And that's quite a feat to be able to do that.
If you could let them know that I think tomorrow we are having a panel that is looking at taking festivals online, because obviously the people who are here,
I will write to them.
Ask them to come on board and take part in that. We'd love to hear their experience.
Okay.
Aaron has a question. Aaron has a question for you.
I actually have a comment or a series of comments. Maybe we can react to that. But my first comment is actually to Mike, a small correction for his introduction. Our carbon footprint is tremendous, even if we're not flying. Live streaming has enormous impacts in the creation of electricity. Every Google search has a carbon footprint. And if you calculated the massive amounts of hours and the number of people, you will see that our carbon footprint will be far more than we believe. That's one thing that we need to keep remembering, and it's possible to calculate that. To you, thank you very much for your contributions and for joining us today. I wanted to comment strongly to the slide that you shared with us, your own personal realizations for the COVID time, because I believe it's one-to-one reflects on the same is true to Austria, and Austria is a completely different society than it is a place like India. So to see that the COVID-19 proves the inefficiencies and the broken systems of all our societies, even those which we are so-called functioning ones, is quite devastating, I think. And the fact that the citizens have such low trust in governments is also a very dangerous point, because in some countries it is the right-wing governments that we are happy that, but something worse can come from that too. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're all going to be democratically, socially thinking voters. I'm afraid I see a strong radicalization and a vacuum for other things. I also believe that some of there's a bit of a romanticization. Maybe that is my critique of this thing, that this crisis is an opportunity, because I don't see it. We've become completely dependent on instruments that would block our access if governments ask them to. So as you might have read, Zoom has blocked access to Chinese activists because Chinese government told them to block it. And these huge corporations that are now making huge profits from instruments like this are, so if India or Pakistan don't want an Indian-Pakistani festival on Zoom, they will know how to block it. I think we're only allowed to communicate internationally as long as we are not, we don't seem like we're not dangerous enough, so we can talk. But I really see this reaction to COVID-19, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I believe that COVID-19 is a real virus, but because certain governments we have the technology now, it is an attempt to also see how far we can push a society to be kind of away from each other with the distancing, and to use tools that we can completely control. Online universities is all about control. Everybody can learn the same thing. And I'm sure this will come. And in Austria, we see the first trends to what I call the new slavery, where corporations say, unions now, we have to reboot the economy. So they were offering workers payment below the poverty line, and this in Austria, and it was accepted. So because people are losing jobs, they will accept any kind of work. So the union blocked it, and they went just above the poverty line now. But the attempt was there to create what I call this new slavery, which is coming towards us very fast way. Because as you said, big business does not care. So I just wanted to share these kind of comments with you.
Yeah.
Great, thanks, Arun, and I stand corrected. Arundhati?
Just a response. I agree with you, Arun, that, you know, in India, we've just passed a law which makes 12 hours working hour instead of 8 hours for the same wage for workers. You're absolutely right what big business will do to workers. And what's also happening is a lot of, you know, almost like labor camps. So all the migrant labor that I was showing you images of who were going home, so they have to rest on the way, right? So many governments, different state governments have done is that they're doing food for work. So they're providing them food, but they're getting them to work in what I would say are labor camps, really. So it's, yes, that's going to happen. But on the other hand, what I also feel about technology is this, that the fact that technology is not a physical thing and that there are enough hackers and crackers around, there are ways and means of going into other possible systems. So for example, many of us in India are not using Zoom for many other reasons, but are using other systems. And there are also sort of a few left-wing systems that are being created, made, shared. Now, again, you know, I don't know how much that is going to be effective, whether it will truly be an underground system that activists and, political activists specifically can use. So whether it is WhatsApp or Signal or Telegram, you know, so it's out there. But with technology, you can sometimes do things which you can't with physical borders. It's more difficult. So I agree with you, but I'm hopeful that there will also be some things that will shift and change in the process.
I'm also hopeful, but thank you for your...
It's something, you know, when governments kind of take advantage of this particular period, there's a writer who wrote about this, and I think they called it epidemic expediency, where essentially those in power use a crisis in order to give effect to things that they had always wanted to do, which might not exactly be progressive, but under the cover of addressing the pandemic, they are able to give effect to these policies. And I think we as civil society need to be quite vigilant about that. I wanted to maybe just give an example of how some of us here in South Africa have been taking on board some of the lessons that COVID-19 has been teaching us, because you're completely right about the inequalities that have been laid bare by COVID-19, but also within the art sector and that which we so blandly call the creative and cultural industries. We don't recognize that within that category of practice, there are differences between the different disciplines as well. And certainly with regard to dance and theater, they are going to be the most affected out of the creative and cultural industries because they are so dependent upon gatherings. You know, one can read a book, one can get one's work published, one can produce a piece of music and download the music, one can go to a gallery and you know, you can have a limited number of people in the gallery and that should be fine. Whereas with theater and festivals and so on, you need that collective of people, both for the form, and it's interesting, you know, what the question that you raised about how this is affecting the form at the moment, and then also obviously affecting box office. And so I, together with a few colleagues, have kind of recognized that it's likely that even beyond COVID-19, dance and theater in particular are going to continue to suffer from a lack of support from the box office, from governments and the like. So we've come together to form a foundation, and it's simply called Supporting Theatre and Dance Stand Foundation. And so we're going to players within the sector, people who have high profiles within the dance and theatre sector, and inviting them to be patrons and to give a certain amount of money to the foundation to help to launch it. And then essentially what we're going to be doing is building a database of up to 100,000 supporters, people who would buy tickets for dance and theatre. And that, as the database, invite them to, on a monthly basis, make a regular contribution in a crowdfunding way to the foundation. And then that fund will be used to continue to support dance and theatre in the long term. And again, it's just learning the lessons of this particular moment. There are so many people in crisis. Government has provided support. There is a government relief program, but out of the 5,000 applications that they've received, less than 10% could be supported. What about the other 90%? So in a way, it's about how do we as the people within the sector look after ourselves? And you're right also about how many people have come on board to help other social sectors. But you know, there is validity in also looking after ourselves. We need to not just do the big fundraising concerts to look after people with HIV and people with TB and so on. We need to do the big fundraising things for our own sector. You want to say something?
Exactly like how you gave an example, I wanted to give one very, very innovative example that's happening in India now. So there are these two musicians, Shubha Mudgal and Anish Pradhan. She's a vocalist, he plays the tabla, percussionist, and they have started something called Gift a Concert. So there's a website where musicians, all kinds of musicians, can put up a little clip of their work and say how much they would charge, like a fee, for a 15-minute concert, a 30-minute concert, and a 1-hour concert. Okay, so this is there as a menu for you. So then, Mike, on your birthday, I want to gift you an 15-minute online concert of a violin, Indian raga being played on the violin, right? So I can book somebody whose work I like, and then you are like, you know, the person that the artist will be playing for, and it said that you can have as much as 10 people listening to it together. So if you have friends coming home that day for your birthday, you can do this. Now this was set up because it was Shubha and Anish felt that a lot of the younger musicians are just, you know, sort of doing these little online Facebook gigs just to let their work out there, but they're not making any money from it. What would happen in India, because we anyway don't have support, and now with this, a lot of young people will leave the arts. A lot of talented young people in music, dance, theatre are going to leave the arts, go back to probably a small family business that they have, or do something else, find other means to support themselves, but really go away from the arts. And we're going to lose, like we used to talk about brain drain when Indians went abroad and worked there and didn't come back. And this talent drain is going to happen from the art sector if we can't provide opportunities. So this is a very interesting, like your Support Theatre and Dance Foundation. This is another idea that, and this can be done in any country. It's an idea that can probably work. And instead of a card or flowers, you gift a concert to someone.
What a fantastic idea.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that's amazing if one could have these artists online and basically give a gift of music, give a gift of someone reading a poem, give someone doing...
Yeah, and it's a live concert. So it's not like a recorded thing. It's for you. It's meant for you. So this artist is singing or playing the instrument for you. And it could be like, if I know your favorite raga or your favorite lyrics or your favorite instrument, I could just like do it that way, and the artist comes. It's almost like doing a bespoke. Is that what it's called? Bespoke, right? Like
bespoke, customized, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, for bespoke.
You. Okay, look, I'm just putting it out there. My birthday is on the 31st of August. So
you have to tell me what you
like. Right, Mira has a question for you.
Yeah.
Oh, a comment.
Hi, question. Hi, thank you, Arundhati. I was feeling lonely up there, like somebody to talk about. So guys, this will be the same thing. You will be listening to our regional presentation. We'll be prepared. So it's just like what we discussed. So I was just like, it's like me talking to myself. Thank you so much for this. Yeah.
Thanks, Mira.
It's like we are completely different, and making people understand what we do is always
And Meera has been doing incredible work with the Prakriti Foundation in India, and they do some amazing festivals. So, Meera, I'm sure you will have plans on how to make those festivals happen, the poetry and the dance and the performance and all of that, right?
Yeah, so now our focus completely shifted to that mental well-being with Prakriti.
Right.
So we are doing a lot of peer-to-peer support workshops. So we've just not thought about the festivals yet. Yeah, poetry, we are thinking of taking it up. Thanks, Arundhati.
Thanks, Meera. Thank you.
A very important point that you made, and folk, I'm just asking questions here, okay, because I don't see any of the group chat people raising their hands. So, but please, if you want to enter the conversation and make comments and so on, please feel free to do so. One of the very important things that you mentioned was the alliance between the arts sector and other social sectors. And I think that this is something which we are coming to realize here. Quite often, the arts sectors, whether consciously or unconsciously, we kind of regard ourselves as a bit special, as a bit other, as a bit, we complain about being marginalized, and yet on the other hand, we kind of see ourselves as being quite special with regard to other sectors in our society. And I think that what this crisis has kind of shown is that we are as affected as any other economic and social sector, and even more so probably. So last week, an organization that I'm part of, we hosted an online webinar on the basic income grant and its relevance to the arts and culture sector. So we had someone who's an expert on the universal basic income grant and the mechanism that many countries have used as a basic means of providing people with some kind of monthly financial security, and its relevance to the arts sector. And so for the first time, there were many people in the arts who were learning about the basic income grant. And then yesterday there was a meeting of the coalition in our country that is mobilizing around the basic income grant, and now has invited artists to be part of that. And so, we need to be seeing ourselves as being integral to these social movements to bring about a better society from which we can benefit as a sector as well. Yeah. So I think that was quite an interesting and important point that you made.
Thank you.
Sefa has something to say.
Not really, Mike. It was just continuing the conversation on the carbon footprint.
Okay, there's a chat happening in the chat on the other side, raised by Aaron. So yeah, it's about the carbon footprint and an article that says it's not as bad as what people have made it out to be. And so there's a bit of a conversation happening around there. The other conversation happens to be around a festival that has been organized for my birthday. I was really just joking, folks. But thank you for the thought. So, folk, I was just going to ask as well, Arundhati, we have obviously a group of festival managers that are part of this particular atelier. You were speaking very much about conditions of inequality that have again been laid bare, and those conditions prevail within our societies, whether it's Austria or India or South Africa. How does one go about creating a festival within those conditions? Who are festivals for? What is the impact of festivals? What should festivals do in these situations of inequality? Do festivals just perpetuate it, or do we kind of make a contribution somehow to addressing it? What is your view?
See, I've been in many festivals, both within the country and some outside the country. What I've been struck by is how some festivals, the moment you enter the space, you almost physically feel what it's all about. There's a very strong vision for the festival. And for me, a vision is not something that you just write on a piece of paper. We can all do that. It takes what, half an hour, having been in this business for so long? But it is about creating the spirit of the festival. And I think it all begins there. I think it's very important for anyone to ask, it has always been and more so today, why? Why are you doing this festival? What is the purpose of this festival? Who is it for? And unless you reach a know why point, so the why has to be kept asking on that, why am I doing this festival? till you come to a place where you have the absolute answer. And that's the truth of that festival, and that needs to come out as the vision of the festival. And I think as far as the festival is concerned, this question that the student from the management school asked me, how do you know who's not in the room, is relevant both in terms of the participants that one curates in the festival, who's part of the showcase, as well as the audiences that you build in. Now, it all comes from your vision, really. Is the vision for your festival to reach a certain kind of people? Then your festival will be accessible to them. Then your festival will be, making sure that the languages that those people speak, their comfort levels, what they want to see in a festival is there for them. On the other hand, if your festival wants to be for a very small group of people with a specific need, then that's where your festival should go. So I'll give you an example. Often in India, festivals happen in incredible locations, okay? So like Goa or Rajasthan, because they're places where we get foreign tourists. So suddenly your festival is connected to the commerce of tourism and not really to the vision of what that festival or the arts actually mean to communities. So you might have a festival in Goa where lots of us from Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay, the arts crowd land up. We spend a week. Because it's Goa, there are also, in all 5-star hotels, you have the festival mentioned and people come. Foreigners who are spending money in this country will come to that festival. But you don't see a single person from that city or that town in that festival. To me, what is this? This is like fly by night. You're not interested in the community there. You're not interested in people there. You are just using it as a space. It's like doing a theater production in a 5-star hotel. There's nothing wrong with it, but then be clear that that's what you want. Then let's not talk participation. Let's not talk inclusiveness. Let's not talk, then let's just say that we could have done this in Delhi, but we're doing it in Goa because it's more fancy and we have the sea next to it. So, getting communities involved, I think, is very important, and not just as audiences, but if possible, also as part of the curation. Can we ask communities whether, and this is amazing because, Sudhanwa, right? Deshpande, Mike, you know him. He runs Leftward books it's a left-wing book publisher in Delhi. They also have a space that's awesome, Studio Safdar. They have a bookshop and a cafe called Mayday Bookshop and Cafe. It's an amazing space right at the heart of a lower middle class, small trading kind of densely populated community in Delhi. What they had done last year was a community theatre festival where the curators were 6 people from the community. There was a gardener, there was a tea seller, there was a homemaker who used to be a teacher, and I forget who but basically people from the community. They came together. They did a workshop with a festival curator. So Sanjana Kapoor, who you also know, Mike, Sanjana did a workshop with them. And after that, it was their choice. They got about 150, I think, applications from theatre groups across the country. And they fought over, and they decided on the 7 or 8 plays that would happen over 3 weekends. And it was called the Community Theatre Festival, Natak Utsav. And it was quite amazing to think of the processes they went through. So this kind of I hope that there'll be more and more participative models of building festivals. So if it's a children's festival, is there part of it curated by kids? If you're doing a festival that's talking about, gender issues, who's curating it? Is it the same curator who curates everything else? Or do we have the voice of the community, not just as representation, because that's where we end with, right? But can we do more than that? Yeah, I feel very passionately about festivals. And as you know, India, we say that every day there's some community celebrating some festivals here. So it's a very festive country as such. And yet, so many of our festivals are so exclusive, so discriminatory. And although it almost feels like all the social evils, prejudices, discriminations that we live with come alive stronger within a festival. So a festival can be a heightened state of what a nation's consciousness is, or a community's consciousness is, I feel. So it highlights all the positives and it highlights all the negatives in equal ways. And that's something we should be very careful about.
It's a very interesting point you make about curating, and a fantastic example in terms of bringing a gardener and a tea lady and so on to basically curate a festival. If that's the audience that you're wanting, and you're wanting their values and their worldviews to be affirmed in your festival, then they need to be part of curating the space. It goes back to something we were talking about yesterday. If the Global North is doing an exhibition, for example, around colonialism and so on, rather than doing it as Global North practitioners, invite people who have been colonized to be part of that curating process, so that you look at these things through the lens of people who have been victims as well. So an interesting point you make. I just wanted to maybe ask, and I see Adele has a comment as well, so we'll come back to him. But just the festival that you were speaking about that went online in India, that brought in new voices, how did they use technology? How did they use technology to reach new audiences? Were they basically bringing on unheard voices for a traditional audience, or were they able to reach a much wider audience as well?
See, it's just finished yesterday, like this festival, so I don't have the details with me yet. But the way this festival was planned, the online one, was to also raise money that would go to the communities of the artists who participated in the festival and to artists. So it was an artists fundraiser in an arts festival. So it was both. I'm yet to, so I had written to TM Krishna, who runs the foundation, that I'll be using their examples, though I don't have data yet. They still have to collate it. So I'll send it to you later and you can figure. It was online, but it's also recorded. And if you make a donation, there's no limit, anything. If you make a donation, you can see it, I think, up to today. Yesterday I saw a post saying another 24 hours, it's available for anybody who makes a donation to come and see it. So it's monetized. It's taken into account the forms that otherwise don't get out there. So it's also caste-based forms, Mike, which are, again, a problem in India. And these are forms that one would say, oh, they are lower caste forms and not high art and stuff like that. So all that politics is also there. Plus, it makes for, so what happens here is communities who would not be audiences of traditional classical music will come in. So it's people's music as well. It's folk music as well. So you'll have a much larger audience. I will get the details from Krishna and share it with you.
Sure. Thank you. Adele.
I have just shared a little YouTube video of the curators speaking in the community festival about how they curated. So if anybody is interested, you can see it later.
Great. Thank you. It's in the group chat. So thank you. Adele.
Thank you, Arundhati, for your presentation and keynote. It's very interesting for me, three things. One of them is how to be independent organization and to make a granting, because I think in Egypt and in many Arab countries, we need something like this, because now we are facing this, the independent sector especially, and it needs, I would like to talk to you, or yes, I will follow the India Foundation, because it's a very interesting idea to have this, and need a lot of effort and common understand also to convince people we are, as an independent, we will, and need really to study the society, because also in the independent sector, we depend on the foreign fund, and now also the crisis, it's in Europe, and so also their agendas sometimes is contradicting with our agenda, or don't start from our needs as independent festivals or independent artists. The second thing is the idea of festival itself, how I see it, and when we go back to history of Greece, this festivals for Bacchus, this god for drinking and dancing and everything. So always festival, it's for me, it means diversity. Somehow we should find this and emphasize this thing. And you mentioned it when you talked about this. And in our society, in our cultures, like Indian cultures and Egyptian cultures, we have this festivity and the festivals in our cultures, but also sometimes because this festivals, religious festivals, has already the connection with the audience because it's the religion. But when we have to do this, sometimes we feel there is the same festivity. You feel the rejection and struggle from the society, and we need to really build on this for years. If you would like to do a festival in a small village, and when we talk about small village in Egypt or in India, it's 100,000, something like this. So it's so you need to build for years to do this. So also this is something very important about how we recognize festivals, because 10 years ago I don't like festivals because you do something and you leave, and you don't leave something with the society. And then I started to recognize, no, it's not like this. This also flame, or this moment, or this week, it's a stay and people remember it. But you have to keep doing this festival somehow, because we don't have the structure in the governments and the other political parties. They don't believe in this somehow. Yes, that's it. And thank you for your presentation. It was very rich.
Arundhati, you're muted at the moment.
Just to say, and this struck me as Adele was speaking, how many of our traditional festivals sometimes are taken over by more conservative right-wing parties when they come on board. And it is through these festivals that they reach out to people in a cultural sort of way. I don't know if it is used in other countries, but in countries like India, where, like Adele said, some of our festivals are connected to religion. If not religion, then community practices as such. And it is very easy for conservative parties to move into this space very quietly, without making overt political suggestions. But very soon you realize that it has become a right-wing festival without, in 2-3 years that change has happened. That is the reason in countries like ours, it's very important to keep a diversity of festivals alive and secular, inclusive nature of festivals alive. And that's why, when we ask the diversity question for curation, it has to go across gender, religion, caste, sexual preference in India. I feel it's very important when we are looking at who is organizing this festival and which is the curatorial team. We ask the expertise question, the experience question. We also ask the community question and the diversity question. It's also important, therefore, looking at the way politics has gone in some of our countries, that we create festivals which can therefore, like the one I shared, the online one, which can carry the voices that otherwise get rejected, like sort of get overlooked or ignored at other festivals. So there are 3 kinds of voices. One that's often ignored, one that's, silenced for the time being, and the third that's totally erased. And they carry different kinds of dangers. And as festival curators or even grant makers, we basically give opportunity, right? We provide privilege. We have to be very keyed in to what those voices are, which are being ignored, silenced, or erased.
So we're coming to the end of this particular session, and I just wanted to maybe say to people like Angela and Sefa and so on, people who are part of the alumni team that organizes online discussions, that one of the things that came out of your presentation could possibly be a topic for our discussions later. It's not a festival specific thing, but it's related. And that is, how does COVID-19 in these particular times affect our understanding of the very nature of our discipline? So for example, the practice that we have at the moment of theater in these times, how will theater change? And there are those of us, and I'm a theater maker, playwright, I understand theater only to exist because they are performers and an audience. It's the live encounter between the practitioners, performers, and the audience that makes it theater. If it happens online, it's not really theater. It's a recording of a theater piece for an audience, but it's not really theater, So is it that we just have a very traditional understanding of what it is, and maybe we need to move with the times, or so that would be an interesting kind of discussion to have as well. So I think it kind of alludes to just the incredible richness of your presentation, Arundhati. You've raised so many different themes, social, aesthetic, sustainability, all of these things, and it's been really, really fantastic to have your voice here. So thank you very much, and wish you well in what you're doing next. And over to Inga just to bring this session to an end. Thank you.
An invitation to everybody: when the borders are off lockdown, please do visit us, visit our festivals. And in the new normal, I hope I'll see all of you in the physical space as well. Thank you very much.
Brace yourself, Arundhati, because they will all do that.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Inge. Thank you, Mike. Thank both of you for inviting me and making me part of this conversation.
Thank you very much, Arundhati. It's been wonderful to hear all your stories. And when you were talking about India, Pakistan, I saw Mira smiling. So I think you already have someone who wants to join you on that project. Very nice also to hear all these practical initiatives of things that you are doing, from which we can learn, and which is really happening. It's been really great to have you here. When I was joking in the beginning that we were already live, so we saw a comment on Facebook that they were just talking.
I got a message from one of my friends saying, do you guys realize you're live?
So just to say that for next time we have to prepare better jokes for the start of our conversations. Also to say what you mentioned, the outreach that we are creating at this point with being in this room together. We have reached 1,200 people with this only on Facebook, what I can see. Not that maybe everybody looked at it or engaged with it, but that those are numbers that start to count. For yesterday, the video that's already online, it's 5,000. So this is interesting to look at. If we would have a physical atelier, we would not have been able to include so many people in this. So it's again, indeed, this thing of opportunities and what we win and what we lose, and to be very aware of that, I think. But thank you all. We have 7 keynotes and 2 public panels during this week. So just prepare yourself for the next one of Orwani Rabia, who will talk about the meaning of festivals, and the search for the meaning of festivals, and then again during a pandemic, which will be later today at 2:30 Central European Summer Time. So hope to see you there. And Arundhati, feel free to join any of the other sessions.
Thank you.
I'm sure you're busy, but you're there.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.